was very interesting to hear a former representative of Spain at the United Nations in the talk today giving a counter position, I suppose, to the one that I put. I think we disagreed on certain aspects, but I think the most important thing that I was trying to put across was that the Spanish claim to Gibraltar is really a political claim. When you assess all the legal arguments, they don't really hold up. Now, the problem for Spain is that it kind of needs those legal arguments in order to be able to make an unconditional case that Gibraltar should be Spanish. But it wasn't always the case. So when I started my talk, I talked about how in 1917, for example, Primo de Rivera, before he was Spain's leader, he made the position while he was the governor of Cádiz that Gibraltar should be exchanged for Ceuta. Now, he recognized that there couldn't be an unconditional claim, that there would have to be some kind of trade-off. Now, obviously, that claim was rejected by the British, because Gibraltar is a much more strategic and defensible position than Ceuta. But it's an important point. It's also reflected in 1966 when Spain was offered by Britain the opportunity to adjudicate the issue in the International Court of Justice. And it took 3 months to consider the issue, and then it rejected the British offer to resolve this case in court. And it was a comprehensive public offer to discuss the isthmus, the airspace around Gibraltar, the waters around Gibraltar, and every other aspect of the dispute. And what Spain said at the time in the United Nations was, this is an essentially political dispute. And this is how it retreated from the offer of adjudication. So my point, I suppose, is that you can't say on the one hand it's essentially political and also seek to rely on legal principles in defense of the claim.
And those legal principles, I imagine, would be territorial integrity.
Yeah, Spain insists that the territorial integrity of Spain is compromised by Gibraltar being British. Now, the problem with this is that the principle of territorial integrity, as it evolved in the United Nations, was designed to prevent situations where colonies that were coming to independence were then carved up with the colonial powers retaining some kind of foothold in this bit of territory that had broken away, and thus, in a way, perpetuating colonialism. The debates in the UN at the time, in 1960, are all very clear that this is the kind of situation the UN had in mind. That was what this territorial integrity provision in the colonial declaration of 1960 was designed to prevent. It wasn't designed to address situations where a state says, I know we lost this territory 300 years ago, but now we want to resurrect this pre-colonial territorial formation, and we want it to integrate with the motherland.
If the Spanish claim is almost historical lip service, what happens now?
Where we are now is in a position, at least at the United Nations, of stalemate. Spain has some support from the anti-colonial bloc, broadly construed within the United Nations, but it doesn't have a critical mass of support, and it doesn't have explicit support for the notion that Gibraltar should be Spanish. Very far from it. Now, Spain is always trying to make inroads in the United Nations, and this is why a point I keep making is that it's actually beneficial for us to keep going there, to at least counter the case. And Britain now is also much more on the ball in relation to these Spanish attempts to build a doctrine of territorial integrity that would encompass its claim to Gibraltar. In the 1960s, Britain took its eye off the ball, in my opinion, and that's why there were a few resolutions in the 1960s that are very unhelpful for Gibraltar, which talk about the need to resolve this issue bilaterally. But we haven't had a repeat of those resolutions since. And what we have, I mean, the ambassador put the counter case that there is some kind of doctrine that Gibraltar should be a case that's resolved bilaterally. There's certainly nothing to that effect that I see, at least, when I read the resolutions and the debates that lead to those resolutions.